History is known for having controversial figures. One interesting historical character archetype is the person who goes to controversial lengths to do good things. One minor example is actually Abraham Lincoln. Back in the day, many saw his administration as going too far. He expanded the government to considerable lengths, raised a huge army to deal with the Confederate rebellion down south, and also ended habeas corpus during the war, which was a big deal at the time. These actions were considered tyrannical by many people at the time, even if he had good intentions. In hindsight, we've seemed to have overall forgiven him. However, what about the people who go further than that? What if I told you there was an elected official who became a dictator, did very controversial acts, but actually did it to help people? He didn't do gulags or genocide or war or anything like that. He just took complete control and just helped his people. He did it controversially, there's no question about that, but he helped people with it. How would you feel about that? What if I told you that this official was actually not even a national level leader, but a local leader? For a short while, we actually had a de facto dictator over the state of Louisiana. His name was Huey Long.
It's made from the bark off the tree that we take from the top down. And that little pop of Hiram's made from the bark that we take from the root up.
Huey Long grew up in poor rural Louisiana. He was always inspired by the idea of the Constitution and Jesus in the Bible proclaiming that all were made equal, but many people were poor and struggling while others were super well off. Naturally, he got a little bit upset at that. When he grew up, he eventually ran for the governorship of Louisiana in 1928, tapping into that resentment at the rich city folk by the rural populations of Louisiana. This was at a time where running water and electricity weren't just utilities provided by the local city or county government, but by a private business. This was also before the Depression, and yet 60% of the state was still poor and without things like water and electricity in their homes. In addition, the roads in the state were quite a mess, leaving so many communities practically isolated in the swamps from the cities or outside world. Huey thought that if the rich of Louisiana wouldn't solve the problem, he would do it himself as governor. After winning, he did at first what normal politicians did: fire everyone in the cabinet and replace them with his friends. This was nothing new. Practically every politician has done this since Andrew Jackson. That was very common at the time, but Huey Long took it a bit further and made sure that there were only absolute top loyalists working with him. He also famously kept what was called a war chest. Basically, if you worked for Huey Long, you had to donate small portions of your salary to his war chest that would be used by Long to fund personal projects. He also used intimidation to pass bills he wanted through the state legislature. What kind of bills? Dictatorship bills? Is he going to execute his enemies? Is he going to use child labor to build? No. He had the gall to pass legislation for free textbooks for children going to elementary school. Wait, what? Yes, not even college textbooks, elementary school textbooks. Yeah, back then you had to pay for those textbooks too. But regardless, he promised that during his campaign, and gosh darn it, he was gonna fulfill it. He also used such tactics to pass bills for other dictatorial things, such as night literary classes for people who never learned how to read. Those lack of good roads I mentioned earlier, he fixed that problem too. Also, he used funds to build bridges, hospitals, and bought cheap gas for the city of New Orleans, which previously just didn't happen. Now those fancy car doohickeys can now drive around the state with no problem. See the weird controversy? This man is using intimidation and consolidation of power to make himself a practical dictator of Louisiana, but he's only doing good things with it. Well, regardless, they tried to impeach him several times and failed. Like any dictator would, Long naturally denounced his enemies in loyalist newspapers, but he didn't kill anyone. Again, such weird middle ground. In 1930, he announced his intentions to run for the Senate. He said if he wasn't elected to the Senate, he would take it that the state did not approve of his governorship and he would resign. Well, he got elected, so it turned out the state mostly liked him. There's not even any cheating here. He fairly won 57% of the vote. Also, there was a coup. Aha! Now he becomes a real dictator, right? No. Actually, his deputy governor tried a coup. Kind of. He basically declared that Long couldn't have both seats and should be stripped of his position. He then declared himself the new governor of Louisiana. The state guards then stopped his army-less coup and he was removed. So what happened when Long's governorship term actually ended? He didn't run again. Instead, he had an ally of his own run, so now he was just a senator. But pretty much his friend who took over Louisiana does exactly what he asks, so he kept his firm control over the state. During this time, he built a new state capitol building, which is literally a skyscraper, and it towered over all the other state capitol buildings at the time.
How many men ever went to a barbecue and would let one man take off the table what's intended for 9/10 of the people to eat? The only way you'll ever be able to feed the balance of the people is to make that man come back and bring back some of that grub he ain't got no business with.
Now we enter the part where Huey Long goes further. It's 1932 and the Depression is affecting America. FDR becomes president. Huey Long supports FDR but goes further when it comes to Louisiana. Long thought that FDR didn't go far enough with his New Deal. He also made sure his successor governor followed his policies to the letter. When he could, he even went inside the state legislature to personally instruct members of his positions to make sure that they followed them as well. He would even sit in the governor's office when he could. As for policy, he proposed bills in both Congress and Louisiana called the Share Our Wealth program. Huey Long was worried about a communist uprising in the United States and believed this program would be the only way to prevent such a violent revolution. It was a program designed to redistribute the wealth in the United States, promising everyone would be able to get a house worth $5,000 in then money, a car, and a radio. Basically, he had a simple asset tax. $1 million is taxed at 1%, $2 million at 2%, and so on. He also kept annual incomes at $1 million a year while capping inheritance at $5 million. He also lowered property taxes as well. You'll notice that these tax rates and caps are hardly anything drastic, yet for the Great Depression, it would help a lot of people. 7.5 million people joined Share Our Wealth clubs across the country to participate in this. While his critics called it communist, Huey again saw it as the nation's only defense against communism. In addition, communists and most socialists actually hated the program as they didn't see it as a proper solution. Huey Long also increased voter registration whenever he could. One year, he increased it by as much as 76%. 25 million would also listen to him on the radio, and 60,000 people wrote letters to him in a year, which happened to be more letters than FDR got at this time. All of this popularity influenced FDR to push for his second New Deal, which contained certain ideas that really changed the country as we know it forever, such as Social Security. FDR at one point even remarked jokingly that he was stealing Long's thunder. Long contemplated perhaps challenging FDR for the presidency in 1936, but eventually Long's enemies had had enough of him. In 1935, in the state capitol building, an assassin gunned him down with a handgun despite his bodyguard's best efforts. Huey Long's life and political career was now officially over. While Long's descendants also became politicians of Louisiana, none of them were quite as impactful or controversial as Huey Long. He was perhaps the only state-level dictator in history, yet did a lot for many people. What's interesting about history is that not every person is a clear good or bad guy, or at least isn't fully good or bad as a whole, but now he's simply a Kaiserreich meme. I'm Emperor Tiger Star, and it's time to end those darn alternate history syndicalists. Thank you for watching.